So the question of when we do our benefit cost analysis and we calculate benefit cost ratios or internal rate of return or net present value, we usually present those for the whole project, right? We don't necessarily calculate them individually for each, so I'm trying to do two things at once, that's why I'm a bit disjointed. We don't necessarily present them individually for each stakeholder. But the reality is that there are commonly multiple stakeholders involved in a project. There might be multiple beneficiaries, different groups in the community or different businesses, or businesses as one group and the general community as another, or a particular local area, and or the government as potential organisations that capture benefits and or incur costs. And even though you sometimes read guidelines that say, don't worry about that, just calculate the total net benefits or the benefit cost ratio for the overall thing and ignore transfers between people, the reality is that decision makers often do care about who benefits and who pays, and often will want to factor it into their decision making. So let's just quickly, I've sort of covered a fair bit of this. Now, some commentators have argued that we ought to be actually accounting for this differences between who benefits and who pays in a very explicit quantitative way by giving weights to the beneficiaries and the cost bearers, depending on some judgment about how appropriate it is that they get benefits or bear costs. Okay, so some argue for weighting of the benefits and costs, often weighted based on things like the level of wealth of that group. So the arguments in favour of this approach could be that money is worth more for some people than others, or that disadvantaged people should receive more support from government. On the other hand, some people argue against weighting on the basis that, for example, that government fund a huge number of initiatives and what matters is the overall result, not the result for an individual project, and imposing distributional objectives on each project will reduce the effectiveness of projects because you'll be sort of constraining them to achieve distributional objectives, and therefore they'll be less able to achieve other types of objectives, whatever they are, transport or agricultural productivity or environmental or whatever, and that those other sort of welfare type benefits are better addressed in other ways through the welfare system and progressive tax. So that's another position. I would observe that weighting is rare in practice, and often governments say that they don't really want it. Here's a quote from the New Zealand guidelines. Equity or distributional consequences of decisions should be drawn to the attention of decision makers at the time of providing information on the BCA. And that's it. They just say, draw our attention to it. They don't say, apply weightings. And so does the New South Wales guidelines, and so does the Australian guidelines. And in this, the Australian guidelines even goes further, and they actually say, we don't want weightings. Does it say here? They actually say, don't wait, just tell us what's happening, who's a winner and a loser, and we'll make our, and with politicians, that's the sort of thing that should be judged at the political level. Okay. Okay. So distribution, okay, now this slide is just saying that who wins and who loses might be seen to matter because of welfare type reasons, but it also might matter for other reasons. It might matter to a decision maker or an agency or an organisation that's organising a project to know who the main beneficiaries of the project will be, so that they can attempt to extract some of the costs from that group in order to make it more likely that that project will proceed. Okay, so this isn't, in this case, this is clearly not an issue that economists need to resolve. The resolution is just to provide the information about who the beneficiaries are. All right, so the recommended strategy that in the Australian government guidelines, and this is what I personally adopt, is to identify all the relevant non-overlapping groups who are beneficiaries or payers, as I said, could be general public, agencies, businesses, local residents, or people who care about a resource. And for each benefit and cost, estimate their incidence for each group and present that as a table, something like that. So here are 4 different beneficiary groups or cost incurrers, and I've got 3 different types of benefits, and I've indicated who benefits, and I've indicated who bears the costs as well in the second bottom line, and I've indicated the net present value for each of them. All right, so I think that meets the requirement. It's probably wise to do that for most projects. Your decision makers or your agencies will consider that helpful. Here's another way of presenting it as a pie chart, which can be quite useful. I mean, this highlights it. I mean, you could already see it by looking at the numbers, but in this case, it really stands out that the people who who capture the benefits are clearly a different group than the people who pay the costs in this particular example.